Ladies, gentlemen, fellow people of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, welcome to my Loki Season 2, Episode 3, titled 1983, Breakdown, Recap, and Review. And what I'm very happy to say in this episode, after having literally just watched it, is that things are very much so opening up. Now we've got the introduction of Victor Timely, the broader sense of what is going on with Kang after the events of Season 1, with the threat of him coming back after the death of He Who Remains. And there's quite a few things that happen in this episode that I can't wait to get to. Lots of theories floating around out there with what actually happened with the young Victor, with the TVA handbook, going all the way to Ravonna Renslayer at the very end with Miss Minutes, and what it is that she hasn't quite told her yet that will make her very, very angry. Let's get into this. Would love to hear your theories down in that comment section below. So right at the beginning, I love the old-fashioned piano Marvel Studios intro, which was a nice play on obviously the setting of this entire episode. And we pick up with Chicago in 1868 with Ravonna Renslayer arriving through the time door. Now, she finds Miss Minutes here, as we can't forget that Miss Minutes gave her information on where to go. This all links back to last season and where she went through the time door. And her mission here was to put a package that she brought with her through a certain window. And that package, very interestingly, turned out to be OB's TVA guidebook. Miss Minutes does inform Renslayer that He Who Remains is dead, but interestingly, this was the plan he made when he knew that the end was near for him. So he knew in the events of Season 1 when Sylvie and Loki went to him, which may end up in his death, that could be happening, and he somewhat had a bit of a backup plan. I guess you could say an insurance policy here, which is what makes this so fascinating to me, and what is making the theory time amongst the community go pretty crazy. This is where we interestingly cut to a scene inside the house where the book is dropped off, and we see a young Victor Timely experimenting on something, and he goes over to the package, and it's kind of like somewhat the future creating the past, and the past creating the future, and the future creating the past situation, or is it? And what I mean by that is, and this is where it is kind of weird to wrap my head around what could really be going on here. And again, I implore you to leave your thoughts down in that comment section, because what we knew from He Who Remains at the end of Season 1 is that he was from the 31st century. He was a scientist. So it's like, okay, so why is there a young Victor Timely, Kang variant, if you will, here in 1868. Now, what we do know is that, quite literally, as according to Miss Minutes and what's going on here, is that apparently this is all a part of his plan. So I guess we can call it that backup plan, this insurance policy. So it is possible that He Who Remains, who obviously ended up on top of all of the other Kangs after winning the Multiversal War, after being the guy at the end of time, maybe put a younger version, possibly a variant or whatever version of himself, into the past, I guess you can say. And the reason why he would have put him in 1868, for example, would be to limit his potential to not obviously grow to the potential of what, Kang ultimately goes on to be, like in the 31st century. So if he puts him in the 1800s, it's like, well, he's sure, as per what we see in this episode, he has all of these ideas, but he can only get so far due to the limit of technology at the time, which is something that this episode keeps referring to. There was even a couple of lines from Victor saying that he wanted to do this, he wanted to do that, and I'm abbreviating right now, but he can never quite get there because he didn't have that technology. So this is why it kind of maybe makes sense that the Victor in this time period isn't actually from this time period, but was rather placed there, just in case, I guess, he ever needed to come back in the events of what happened, I suppose, at the end of Season 1, which I guess you can somewhat slingshot forward to. He knows that if he died, He Who Remains died. This would bring about a bunch of Kang variants, so if he placed a version of himself back in the past, he could, I guess, go through the events of what happened before, the Multiversal War, this, that, and the other, and then ultimately beat all of the other ones and become, once again, the one on top. The one, or should I say, He Who Remains. Now, that is getting really trippy already right at the beginning of this video, But I'm not saying that is the case, but this seems to be like, I feel a good vibe of maybe what could be going on. But no matter what, on the bottom line right now, I definitely don't think that Victor was born in like 18, I don't know, how old was that kid? Like 10, 1858? I don't think that. I think he must have been put there somehow. Don't forget that this part of the timeline where Ravonna arrives, as it says, 1868, sacred timeline, and the sacred timeline is technically the mainstream timeline, but it's artificially constructed and made by He Who Remains up until that point. So everything from branches being pruned in the past by the TVA, everything that happened in the main timeline, including this young Victor Timely, was a result of He Who Remains' godlike plan. So he technically did plan for that to happen there and then. It's just now he's counting on his followers like Miss Minutes and Ravonna Renslayer to bring about whatever his backup plan is. Now, speaking of the sacred timeline version of 1868, this is where we have Loki and Mobius arrive because, yeah, the branches are growing out of control. We have OB freaking out about everyone dying, and I know there's a lot of theories about OB as well. After Loki and Mobius arrive in 1868, they're kind of like, there's nothing really much going on here, but there's another hit in the same place, but in 1893. And when they go to 1893, you may have recognized that this is a branch timeline, and that is because, I guess you could say, when Ravonna put the TVA guidebook through the window, that is somewhat this weird nexus point that created this different version, this variant version of Kang, which is why they refer to this Victor Timely as a variant of He Who Remains. But technically, the one that was a kid where Ravonna went to in the sacred timeline at the beginning of the episode could have been a younger version of He Who Remains. You see what I mean? It's getting a bit wibbly wobbly. I may not have all the details perfect there, but I feel like it's somewhere in the right area. This is where they arrive at the Chicago World Fair. Things are starting to make a little bit more sense now. Just as Mobius is going on about good old-fashioned legwork, finding breadcrumbs and clues, we have one of those paper boys talk about a ghost clock haunting the Midway. Got to say again, I was singing their praises every episode, I think. I think another thing, on top of just the premise of this series that I find so interesting with the, theories, that's always a fun thing to speculate on each week. The overall timey-wimey, alluring aspect of the story. Tom Hiddleston and frickin' Owen Wilson. I just love their chemistry. When they're going on about Cracker Jacks here, I can watch like a whole episode of just these guys, I don't know, joking about like this. They spot an advertisement for Victor Timely's astounding temporal marvels. Also, I noticed on the sign as well, when I did a little bit of research into this, we see a listing for Hedwig Wolf to perform on German pipes. Now, this is possibly a reference to Hedy Wolf, of whom is a childhood friend of none other than Patsy Walker, of whom you may remember from Jessica Jones. So I'm willing to bet that is like a little Easter egg in the episode. And so this is where Mobius and Loki arrive at the event. Victor Timely's performance, or whatever you want to call it, is about to happen. And they also recognize what's on stage is somewhat of a model of the Loom. So here we have Victor Timely, and again, if the theory or any part of that theory is roughly correct with what we went over earlier, this is technically a Kang. I mean, it is technically a Kang, but one who is putting on a show like this, but limited in the time period. This is why, what we find out, he's a bit of a swindler, a little bit of a con man, but still has a brilliant mind. I mean, don't get me wrong. He has the mind of Kang, but also he grew up with OB's guidebook. So this is one thing that is very important to emphasize, and what is perhaps done so deliberately of what we went over earlier. He has all of this potential, but he can't quite manifest it into something that he can apply to the world or the universe in the way he wants to. So what's the next best thing that you can kind of do in the 1800s? And I guess that is to show off some sparkly things, as we see with this event. I don't think that loom particularly worked. It just kind of set off a bunch of electricity. But yeah, like you get a bit of cash, which is where a little bit of a bidding war started to happen. He got like $1,000 from some industrialist American dude. And I do like a line that that is referenced at this point as well, because it calls back to later on. We have that guy saying, I want a partnership, and this is where Victor replies saying, no, I don't do partners, which is why what kind of happens later on to Renslayer happens. I know he comes across as a bit of an awkward person, this, that, and the other, but we know the potential of what this man turns out to be, and that is Kang the Conqueror. And I think this is just the most subtlest hint of something a bit deeper to him that isn't so desirable. Like, Renslayer seemed to be getting along with him all right, but as soon as he heard the whole partnership thing, well, we'll get to that a little bit later. He didn't exactly keep her on. But either way, after all of this, Mobius is like, we need to get him back to the TVA because it's his temporal aura that can sort out the whole temporal loom problem that they're having. This is where things get a bit hectic in the episode. We have Renslayer going after him. This turns into a little bit of a chase scene, and this is where Casey gives him a heads up with B-15, saying that there's been another dangerous tempad reading 10 feet from where you're standing, and it was none other than Sylvie. Now, I was a bit like, I don't know how to word this. At the end of season 1, what I struggle with Sylvie is the personal motivations for the character. I get it, especially with the backstory, running all her life, hiding out in apocalypses from the TVA, and this is the man who is the dictator of all free will, or at least has the potential to be that. But once again, with the threat of what would happen if she killed him explained to her at the end of season 1, she didn't really care and still went through with it. And here we kind of end up with another situation in where Loki is quite literally explaining to her that there will be no life to go back to if the TVA is destroyed, and without him, Victor Timely, it can't be fixed. And that is the temporal loom problem that would destroy the TVA, and the TVA protects all the branches, the one where she works at McDonald's, and if that branch goes, boom, because of the temporal loom, she's being explained to about all of this, and she's still like, Ree, I'm gonna kill you. And I think for me, it's just, I get being frustrated, but the writing of this is just a bit hard for me to buy. She's like literally throwing every sense of reason out the window at this point, just like she was at the end of season 1, which was obviously for plot reasons. So obviously everything could go haywire and multiple Kangs could spawn. That's what it really felt like. This had to happen. Sylvie had to act that way for that to happen because of plot. But thank God, towards the end of this episode, she wasn't still doing that from this moment on out, because obviously she spared him at the end and changed her mind. So I'm really glad that they didn't keep that up, because I think I would have found Sylvie's character pretty frustrating, even with in-story character motivations taken into account, if she were to do this all season long. So up next, we have Renslayer go back to Victor Timely's place, and it's very clear that there is, he's quite taken with her. And as for Ravonna, you can definitely tell that they blatantly tried to put some effort into, there's a little blush moment here or there, and it's not like she's in love with him or anything, but there's clearly some moments where she did seem happy, despite what she said later about the partnership thing. But this is where Miss Minutes, and this is where things started to get a bit creepy in the episode, she was laying down her territory here, being like, well, even before the TVA, or before her, and you see how awkward Renslayer looks in this moment, you created me and we work together at the end of time. And so this is where Renslayer, Victor, and Miss Minutes get on a boat to go across the lake or wherever it is to Victor's actual headquarters, where he keeps his most prized work. This is where Ravonna asks what that is, and he says that it's the key to understanding and manipulating time. And he shows her the TVA handbook, and I think, he's obviously got a fanboy out when he meets OB. You can see Miss Minutes in the background just getting really, really salty about how Ravonna's somewhat taking all of the credit here for how the book got dropped off into his life. He makes her a flower out of paper, somewhat displaying his newly found affection for her. Even touches her hand a little bit. Miss Minutes at this point is kind of raging in the background. But when he's holding her hand, this is where she says that she has high hopes for this partnership, which seems to be a bit of a trigger word for Victor, because he really doesn't like partnership. And this is somewhat maybe to him paring off a little bit of his intention there. And, again, Ravonna may kind of be like, oh, okay, we'll see where this goes, but like, they're not in a relationship right now or anything. But either way, that was enough for them to, when she went to sleep in the life raft, the lifeboat, for them to cut her loose and basically abandon her. And at this point, it was just Miss Minutes and Victor Timely. I do want a bit more exploration into this, because I mean, I get it. I get what they're trying to allude to with the whole partnership trigger word for him thing. But, like, just, you know, to instantly cut her out like that when he seemed kind of taken by her and, you know, he's being invited into this whole new world that can help him realize all of his ideas. And, you know, Miss Minutes isn't only a part of that, but also, obviously, Renslayer to him at this point in time. But he's just, like, straight up cutting her out. I just felt like it was a bit rushed there. But anyway, we're going to get into some theories with regards to what the whole thing is, sort of Renslayer at the end, and how the romance could come into this and, you know, somewhat maybe take some beats from that of the source material. When Victor gets back to his place across the lake, this is where Miss Minutes gets... yeah, very freaky, because she reveals that they should lay low, maybe not go back to the TVA like Victor had thought, and starts professing her love for him, and also a little bit of pent-up anger in the fact that in all the time she spent with him, the eons, if you will, with the kind of other version of him, not this version, but there was one whim that she was never allowed by Kang, and that is a body. So yeah, I like the way they approached this scene, because it started off a little bit comedic at first, and then gradually as it went along, it got more and more eerie. And you have to think that maybe Miss Minutes was not only created as, you know, the fact that she is a very helpful AI, but when and how or if and with what way they get into the romance between Kang, Victor, or whatever, and Ravonna Renslayer, and the past there, and the Loki recording, or the recording that Loki stumbled across with Renslayer and Kang thanking her for leading with him, and all of that stuff that, as we're about to get into, maybe he created her to not be lonely because he missed Renslayer. Like, her only potential purpose for creation was to kind of embody someone or something to fill the void. But as to why he didn't have Renslayer anymore, well, we'll get into that in a second. But this is where we have Renslayer herself catch up. But important to remember that this is a Renslayer who doesn't remember anything of their past. And, you know, I was kind of thinking, like, okay, he was talking about all episode not being able to create or having the technology to be able to realize his, you know, plans and dreams from that of the TVA guidebook and stuff. But he's basically made a pruning stick. Like, that thing actually worked. So I don't know what powers that thing, but my God, like, I don't know if they should have included that, because that seems like he could kind of do some wild things. This is where also Loki and Mobius arrive, and, you know, this is where Renslayer is also threatening Victor. I don't know how I felt about this moment, because it felt like, unless I was missing something, and unless she was bluffing, which I don't know if she was, it felt like it didn't really make much sense. Mobius was saying that she's lost her way, yet she's threatening him with the prototype pruning stick, and right before Sylvie came in and sent the little Sylvie Loki wave, she was about to, like, you know, prune him. So, what? So I don't know if she was dedicated to the secret mission sent from He Who Remains, and they were kind of maybe going down the start of a potential adaptation of the Terminatrix arc for her, and where she's like, hey, screw it. Screw the He Who Remains mission. Screw bringing back Kang or Victor Timely to make him the next He Who Remains. I'm going to rule the whole universe and all of time. And I felt like it was a bit confusing and a bit personally nonsensical to me, because, again, some of her first lines were, I was entrusted to this mission by He Who Remains, not his variant, losing my voice here. So from now on, I'm in charge, for her then to just almost kill him. I don't know. And to get a bit nitpicky here as well, when Loki and Mobius arrived, I was thinking, well, Loki, why don't you just teleport her like the way you teleported that guy earlier into a cage? I feel like this is a thing that a lot of people do criticize with the MCU, is, you know, the consistency of in-universe logic, because I did feel like, what, is that not what he did earlier? He has that ability. He could kind of do it now, maybe? I don't know. Either way, though, this is where Sylvie arrives, wipes her out. This is where she's about to go up to Victor Timely. She spares him, says, you know, don't make me regret this. And I think it'll turn out to be typically that she's still somewhat right, because, yes, Victor may not be lethal right now, but once he gets a taste of, especially now going into the TVA, what he can do and the ambitions that will come along with that, yeah. And so as Loki and Mobius go through the time door to the TVA, which we're going to pick up with next episode, and would love to hear any theories you have with regarding OB, this is where we have Sylvie confront Renslayer, and she manages to not kill her, but saying, if it's power that you want, a seat at the end of time. Be careful what you wish for. And she uses that little device that she took from He Who Remains that has the ability to not only send you through a time door and teleport, but send her all the way to the end of time, and where we see the decaying body of He Who Remains after Sylvie killed him. And this is where Miss Minutes gets brought out, and she says, even herself, it was foolish to make an enemy out of someone who knows all of his secrets. So if we are going to now have an opposing side from Renslayer and, funnily enough, maybe Miss Minutes allied there, they will know a lot about Kang thanks to Miss Minutes. And even though Victor Timely isn't quite who he could be yet, they will be able to maybe predict maybe some of his moves. But this is where we need to get in some theories regarding Miss Minutes saying that she knows a really big secret about Renslayer, but it's going to make her really, really angry. Now, I think there's a few ways that this can go, and by all means, I'm not saying any of these are right. I would say that the first one could most typically be that perhaps they are somewhat adapting a form of the relationship between that of Renslayer and Kang the Conqueror from the comics. Now, again, as I always say, adaptations aren't copy and paste. Clearly, they're being innovative with Victor Timely in this episode. It doesn't mirror things exactly from the source material, but they could be somewhat going off of the recording that Loki found of Kang speaking to Renslayer in the past, where he once ruled the TVA. It was after the Multiversal War, and it could be the secret. And we could be blowing it out of proportion here as a fandom, but the secret on the most basic level could be that she would just be very annoyed to learn that they were together, maybe. And with all of that context, even though she doesn't have the feelings to relate to it right now, you could still be very annoyed to learn that you helped him win the Multiversal War and that they led together, and she even maybe helped him build the TVA, and an entire life with him has been erased as her memory was wiped from all of their time together, and she was placed at the TVA. Maybe out of an effort to reflect the source material, in the sense that there was one point in where she actually died saving Kang, and where she initially didn't love him, but just as he was about to get shot, she jumped in front of him, confessed her love, but she died. So I have seen some theories out there with some people saying maybe there is a point in that past we heard, in where Loki heard that recording, that past, in where no matter what, she ended up dying, and there's one thing that he could do, and that is somewhat love her from a distance, wipe her memory, because if her memory was intact, she would always go back to him, and suspended her at the TVA, so she could be alive. Some kind of romantic, weird thing like that, potentially, and that's why he then went on to create Miss Minutes. And Miss Minutes kind of became obsessed with him, but ironically was only created to kind of fill the void of Ravonna. Now, there are some other crazy theories out there, which, you know what, never say never, in how she could actually be a Kang variant herself. To somewhat parallel, I guess you could say, the male Loki, the female Loki, and also the kind of Loki in love, and then you also have the male Kang and the female Kang. And they could kind of somewhat be in love, even though Renslayer's memory was wiped of that. And again, this could come back to the whole romance side of it, because maybe things in the past got to the point of where she became and took the alias of Terminatrix, and where she kind of went up against Kang. But maybe in this live action iteration, even though things kind of went awry between them potentially, out of his love for her, he still wanted to keep her around and not kill her. And, ended up wiping her memory, putting her at the TVA. Again, I kind of said two different things there. So, yeah, I guess she could, as some people are saying, be a straight-up literal variant of Kang, but a female Kang. But then she could have been, a person from their distant past, in where she was actually a potential problem to him, in where, as per Terminatrix, had ambitions to basically replace him and usurp Kang's position and become the very thing that Kang is and rule over everything. But he couldn't quite get rid of her because of his love, and sent her packing to the TVA and with no memory. Bottom line with this, I can imagine, and I could be wrong about this, but with Miss Minutes teasing that after she learns the secret, she'll be very, very angry, that they could go on a somewhat adaptation of her Terminatrix arc, and where she will be a threat. But I can't imagine that she's going to really come out on top, because clearly Kang is going to be a thing that lasts for a little while longer yet in the MCU, as opposed to the idea of Renslayer literally usurping Kang as Terminatrix and becoming the new Kang. if you will. But maybe I am completely wrong with any of those ideas. Maybe I missed an idea out that you guys have heard of, or maybe come up with yourself. So let me know those down in the comments below. As for this episode, I would say that I really enjoyed it. I'm really, overall, guys, enjoying Loki Season 2. And this is even, I completely agree with this take. Setting up Kang, even though Kang, he who remains is dead, but, you know, with this new iteration, a new wave, and this new foreshadowing threat looming over us, no pun intended there, of other Kangs, in a way more formidable way than even Quantumania did. And I'm along for the ride, especially with Tom Hiddleston, Owen Wilson, whatever else is going to fricking come our way. So once again, guys, thoroughly enjoyed this, thoroughly enjoying getting into the speculation theory time aspect of Loki Season 2 and where the heck things could go in episodes ahead, because with each installment, things are just getting more exciting, especially now that Victor Timely has been taken to the TVA. So again, would love to hear your thoughts and theories down in that comment section. If you enjoyed this video, and especially if you're at this point, would greatly appreciate a like on it. Consider subscribing for more videos like this. Check out some of my other videos. You're probably seeing one of them on screen right now. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow tricksters in the next video. Goodbye.